Hello? This one doesn't work though. But I should use another. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so good afternoon. You've all come to the exceedingly cheery panel. Welcome to the RK Arts and Book Festival 2017. My name is Bim Adewumi, and I'll be moderating today's panel discussion with Florida Uzoaru, Kekela Mawole-Osho, and Professor Femi Oyebade. So we're discussing, like I said, the exceedingly cheery topic of sexual violence, which is exactly what everyone wants to do on a Saturday afternoon. But the issue of sexual violence is a public health issue, and that's regarding both physical and mental health, and that's something that I think we're all aware of, but we don't necessarily think of. So on this panel, we are going to be discussing the ways in which we as a society treat survivors and victims of sexual abuse. We're going to talk about the stigma that follows survivors and victims, and we're going to look also at the absence of structures that would help to alleviate some of the problems that kind of dog survivors of sexual abuse. So let's introduce the panel properly. To my left is Professor Femi Oyebade. He's a professor of psychiatry at the University of Birmingham in the UK, and he is consultant psychiatrist for Birmingham and Solihull Mental Health Foundation Trust. He's also published several books of poems, and in 2016 was awarded the Royal College of Psychiatrists Lifetime Achievement Award. To my immediate right is Kekela Mawole-Osho. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I thought I was, but I wasn't sure. She's a photographer and an entrepreneur who specializes in children, maternity, and family photography. She's also the author of a self-titled memoir which details childhood sexual abuse. She teaches photography and entrepreneurship, and recently held an event called Sexducate, which is an education platform for teachers and school owners and professionals who work with children and youth. And to my far right is Florida Uzoaru, who is the co-creator of SlideSafe, which was formerly known as Sex in a Box, which is my preferred name, but a startup that is preoccupied with something that a lot of us should be, which is sexual consciousness. The service delivers STD test kits and other sexual health products, and she co-founded that with Precious Anubia and Janet Nwoshai. Okay, so let's begin. I think at the moment we're in a very interesting point at which we are discussing more than usual the issue of sexual violence, and that's in part to a story that broke several weeks ago about the Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein. And those allegations, essentially against him and other prominent men in Hollywood, has kind of been horribly fascinating to watch. I think a lot of us have stories of things that are not quite the same, but are similar. And so watching it has been something that is fascinating in a way, because you recognize elements or all of it, but there are echoes for so many women, and I think that was kind of borne out by the number of stories that came out. The issue with the Weinstein thing is that it's had ripples that have kind of gone away from Hollywood and have kind of gone into other places. So we've had stories from business people, from publishing and literature, from the military, all over the place. And I wanted to ask, the Weinstein story basically took us years to break. Part of the reason why that came out is because you have to perform, obviously, rigorous journalism to make sure you have the allegations correct, you have supporting evidence, and so on. But another part of that is also that men like Weinstein, according to the reports that have come out, also did a lot of work to suppress a lot of the victims and the survivors' stories. So I wanted to ask a twofold question, because this is the thing. With this Weinstein thing, it feels unprecedented because men are losing their jobs, and that almost never happens. There's a lot of noise, and then it goes away after 2 weeks. But people are losing their livelihoods. People are being stripped of honors. People are being essentially shunned. I don't know how long it will last. It might just be a couple of years and everything will be forgiven. There'll be a redemption tour. But at the moment, it feels very, very like something we've never seen before. I wanted to ask, specifically the two of you who live in Nigeria. I know you don't live here, Professor. But I wanted to ask, what do you think it would take for there to be a Weinstein-esque story in Nigeria? Is it possible? Could there ever be a situation that you would think, oh yeah, that's the thing, that's the straw that will break the camel's back in that way?
Hi, is this, okay, this works. What I think is maybe, but not in the nearest future. And one of the reasons I feel that is I think we have a culture of transactional relationship in Nigeria. Not just Nigeria, it's something that's quite widespread, but in Nigeria it's quite strong. And what I mean by that is that sex is an acceptable form of payment. It's an acceptable way of showing gratitude to somebody. And you know, traditionally in Nigeria, the men are the ones who have the power, and so most of the time the women are the ones who need assistance or help. So oftentimes sex is about the only thing the woman has to trade with, and so that's what she uses to say thank you for the good thing you've done for me. And I remember, this might have been some years ago, I don't know if I mixed up the story. There was this actress, Folake, that there was a big issue, and I know one of her friends came out, and one of the things she was saying was that she introduced him to somebody to help her, and instead of just taking the help and going away, she decided to take the help and stay and get her friend, his wife out. So that was one of those scandals that came out of it. And so to first of all start taking some of the things that happen and to see it in the form of assault, we have to first of all recognize it as being an assault rather than being say thank you. Like, you know, how you give people cola, you give 2,000 naira, say, oh, take cola, something like that. So it has to move away from where we see it at, oh, this woman is just thanking him for helping her, to this man has actually assaulted her. So I think we haven't yet got there yet. We're still focused on seeing putting, okay, these are prostitutes and these are runs girls, and then this is the rest of the women. However, everybody is really doing everything that all these people are doing. It's just that some people are doing it on a more professional level, but the other people are still doing the same thing. So that is what I feel. And we have to also begin to have conversations about workplace sexual assault, which is not something that really goes on. Because I remember a couple of days ago, I tried to have a conversation about workplace harassment. And one of the things somebody was strongly arguing was that harassment does not exist in the Nigerian law as a crime. So how can you talk about harassment when it is not a recognized law? So you understand, this is some of the things we need to because if you want to, policies are good, you know, workplace policies are good, but at the end of the day, you cannot persecute somebody based on a workplace policy if there is no law to back it up, you know. And I also have to say that at the moment, when sexual harassment happens in workplaces, people close rank, you know, that is something that happens. So I don't have a lot of hope for something happening, but maybe I'm happy to be proved wrong.
And can I ask, sorry, and can you think of a time in which, I'm asking you, Kekelomo, do you think that there is a time that something like this might happen? Has there been something that may have been encouraging to you that things are moving towards a situation where we could have a Weinstein-style story?
I'm very positive that we are tending towards that soon, in my opinion, because there's a lot of awakening now and information. It has not gone widespread yet, but we're having more information about sexual assault. An average Nigerian does not understand what it means to be assaulted. Like she has said, like, it's okay, you rather say you are doing or not doing well. Why are you saying that the person is assaulting you? Like, it's normal. So because you are thinking that it's okay, you want to like, shut up. you're not the only person. If he did it to me and my friend, and was there, you don't make a fuss about it. But as we keep educating them, as information is growing, I think probably we'll still have, it will happen more, I think, in the younger generation. It will happen more among younger people. The adults that have decided to live with it, I think it's a normal thing. But now we have young persons now understanding that it's okay to talk. It's really okay to talk. Like when I was going to release my book, there were a lot of emotions, like people, well, I have people that attack me and the likes of it, but it was well received. Now, if you have people that still think, what's wrong with you? Were you the only one? Someone commented on Okada books after reading it, like, well, I had my own experiences too. Like, what's the big deal there? But I'm sure that people will speak out. Now, it's just for us to just keep creating awareness. And like, when I go for advocacy, I let them know that you will not die if you speak out. Especially if you speak out, probably you have right people that can help protect you. Peradventure, the person you want to speak out about is someone that can harm you, someone that you can wake up tomorrow and find out that the lady that said this person did this to me is dead. But if you know that it's someone that that would not kill you, or you will speak out. But I can assure you that now that people will speak out. Let's just wait for one actor to just try one young smart girl. A young lady was assaulted by a doctor. She sent me the chat. I don't know how she did it, the timing and everything. There's a way the chat came in. I'm like, this doctor, if he knew what this girl just sent to me now, that he's in trouble if this thing goes online the way, I don't know how she did it. But it means that but I'm expecting that it's the younger persons that will talk. The 30s and above really are just thinking, let's just live with it.
And Professor Oyebode, I know you don't live in Nigeria, but you are obviously at the forefront in the UK. You must, I wonder if you've had clients who have experienced sexual violence, and I'm wondering how different, or rather how similar the Weinstein thing in terms of awareness. Is that something that you see in the UK, that people feel a bit more open to come and talk about that sort of thing as compared to, for example, the experiences of people in Nigeria?
Yes and no. I think, I suppose what I want to do, if I may, is just to, facts help when we have a discussion of this kind, and definitions help. And I know it's a literary festival, and you may not want to take a kind of actual, factual approach. So we need to kind of have a definition of what it means to talk about sexual violence, and there is a definition. There's a WHO definition, and it's a gender-based violence which involves men and women, and in which the female is usually the victim, and which is derived from an unequal power relationship between men and women, and the violence is directed specifically against a woman because she is a woman and affects women disproportionately. And it includes violence that is perpetrated or condoned by states, so that behaviors of countries like Iran and Saudi Arabia, where particular acts are specified at women, that also includes sexual violence. So it's important to say it like that. Second thing to do is to get a sense of the proportions that we're discussing, because by focusing on Weinstein and people of that sort, you make it sound as if it's rare and unusual. Therefore, it's important just to set it properly in its proper context. So there's a large WHO study which looks at 24,000 women from all over the world to get a sense of what is the experience of sexual violence, which includes sexual violence and what we might normally call domestic violence. And it just shows you how prevalent these behaviors are. So the rates are from anything between 15 to 71% of women reporting they've been exposed to violence of this kind. The lowest rates are from Japan, and the highest rates are from Western Europe. You might think that the highest rates would come from the developing countries, but actually they don't come from developing countries. And the rates, we don't have Nigeria wasn't one of the sites, so we have no figures for Nigeria, but there are figures for Tanzania and Namibia. And in Tanzania, it's 54% of women. Just over half women experience sexual violence, domestic violence. And in Namibia, about a third of women reporting it. So I make that point because it is extremely important to not to talk of it as if it's incidental. You have to keep in mind that this is very prevalent, so prevalent that it is practically normalized. And the final point I want to make in this regard, in this kind of introductory aspect of it, is that we've just seen that marvelous enactment of the play, of Lola Shoneyi's play, a book. And in there, you might have watched that without recognizing that you were seeing sexual and domestic violence, and that was occurring as part of life. And so you have to be sensitized so that you recognize it, so that you can point at it, so that when it occurs, you don't regard it as something which is normal that people just accept. So the situation is the same everywhere, that it is so prevalent as to be invisible, and that it only becomes visible when you get a kind of celebrity situation which draws attention to it. But you want to reject that aspect of it, because what you want to do is to keep reminding people this is pervasive.
The issue of the pervasiveness, I think, is something that's very interesting, because as someone who works in the media, of course, you can tell the stories of the everyday, but in terms of impact, nothing hits quite like a celebrity who has done this thing. And that's an unfortunate state of affairs, but it is the way it is, where you can tell the stories of everyday women, and there are stories of everyday women. 2 women a week are killed by their domestic partners, and that's one of the horrible things about this. And this, I think, is an all-pervasive rape culture that exists across the world. So I don't mean to point out Nigeria or you know, exclude Nigeria as some kind of, you know, the worst possible place. I just wanted to make that clear also. Another question I have is regarding this issue of the everydayness of it and the reactions that people have. Almost always, when there are women who come forward to say that they've been sexually assaulted or they've been sexually harassed or whatever, the reaction is often one of vilification from strangers. I bring up the case of an artist, a Nigerian artist by the name, her pseudonym online was Sugar Belly. And she brought, and now that you didn't get it, you've decided to kind of go nuclear, and so on and so forth. With regards to where we will allow survivors to tell their stories, what does it take for us to allow survivors to tell their stories and not be judged, and not be seen as less than the good and deserving victim? Because there are, you know, hierarchies in place when we want a victim of sexual assault. We want her ideally to be a virgin. We want her to have been attacked by a stranger at night. We would like, if possible, to have video evidence. And all these things are almost impossible. So in light of that, what does it take? Because Sugar Belly took a risk by going online and speaking at length about this. And she wouldn't stop, at great cost to her own mental health, by the way. And I want to ask, how do we get to a place where people talk about the crimes that have been done against them, and we as society listen to them and allow them to talk and do not go? I mean, I read some of the comments over the years that were directed at Sugar Belly, and they are almost violent in their imagery also, like people wishing her more harm and so on. Lots of, you know, it's horrible. So I wanted to ask, what will it take for us to get to a place where survivors are not put on that hierarchy of, are you a good victim or are you a bad victim?
I can go? Okay. I think, like you mentioned already, there's a problem of a perfect victim. That's what we generally start looking at. You mentioned Sugar Belly. I think the expectation will continue as long as people who do not fit in that perfect victim keep quiet about it. But if they talk about it, if they keep talking about it, you know, people will, to some degree, get to understand that, hey, you know, things happen. Yesterday, I've been a victim of sexual assault twice in my life, and I've been talking about it on Facebook, but never really openly. I would just make a comment one or two places. But yesterday, because I was going to come up and talk about rape here, I told myself, I wanted to have a controlled environment to tell my story first before I come here, and maybe if I'm not able to control myself, I would have gotten the opportunity to, you know, get things together. So I told my story yesterday, and I was raped the first time when I was 16 by a boyfriend, and the second time when I was about 26 by a male friend. And I was able to tell the story on Facebook. And when I told the story, I received goodwill. There was a lot of people who did not attack me. It was not, maybe the first incident, I was a virgin then, so maybe I did get some kind of sympathy there in the sense that I was a virgin and this happened and he didn't get my consent and he did it. But the second time I wasn't. And it was somebody who had gone to his house to watch a movie, and I slept off, and then I woke up in the middle of the night and found him doing what he was doing. There was only I think there was only one comment, one person who said, who called me an attention seeker, and when he did that, a lot of people responded to him and told him that this he was doing was wrong. But it really has to take with more and more people telling their stories so that we can get to see that there are different faces to how sexual violence happens. There is no one story, you know, there is no one way. And not just because in telling the story we get to understand, but even the people who experience it get to understand also, because it took me a really long time to come to the point of saying I was actually raped. It took me a very long time, because the things that happened to me was so different from how I understood rape to be. So this is what happens, and in my own case, I didn't fit getting used to it and also start recognizing when it happens, so that even because some of the times the people who attack rape victims are people who themselves have been raped, but they don't believe that they have been. There is this otherness that they feel about rape. So this is something that happened to somebody else, and therefore it's easier for them to sit in judgment. But when they recognize that this is something that happened to me as well, and they look at themselves and say, okay, have I in any way done anything that makes me a saint? No, then maybe I should be a little bit less expectant of this person becoming a saint. So that is what I think.
Okay, so starting with the example of Sugar Belly, I read through some of the stories, and I realized that she had been writing about it, but the story just never blew. But people thought that because the guy's father was now the governor or something, and that was why she came out, because they were not patient enough to follow through and see that she had been writing about it. And I come to realize that sometimes one of the reasons why they judge on social media is they follow trend. Sometimes they check your work, your post, the kind of things you post. Now, if you are the type that have been looking nice, prim and proper on social media, you just post motivations, inspirations. So the day you come up and say, so and so raped me, or I was abused when I was 13, you would receive less mockery, because you're thinking, this thing must really have happened to this girl. But if you are the type that posts lollipop, hot as ever, now, and then you post it, I just feel me, or either you go like, men are what? So if you are, so by the time, so what happened is, whether you are lying or telling the truth, now people don't want to even think you are telling the truth. They are quick to think, what's wrong with this one? See some people are like, see you. Like the way you even be dressing, why would they not abuse you? Some people don't even realize that the story you wrote was something that happened years ago. They just think, who else? Sometimes they think, who should they abuse if not you? Because they just assume that when you are always posting the legushy things, they just think that you are not a good girl. So I think oftentimes, especially in Nigeria, we choose who we judge. There are some people that has mocked somebody else that can comment on my own post and be nice. I am wondering, the same person that insulted somebody on their comment is being nice to me. Why? Sometimes they have perceived you from who they think you are on social media, and they have judged you just like that. Then another thing for this social media issue is an average Nigerian does not understand the effect of being abused. So if you see me and I decide to look in a certain way, they did not even realize that it is probably the abuse that has turned me to that. I would say that before you say, oh, she's a prostitute, she sleeps around, there's a why question. Why is she doing this? Now sometimes you think, oh, because she just like men, that girl, she can fuck anything. Or you are thinking, oh, it's probably the one that she wants money now. They want to use iPhone 10 and iPhone 12. That's why they are sleeping around. Sometimes they don't know that it's coming from somewhere. There's something that is provoking this action. Now, so before I say that I'm a prostitute, there's something that initially made me first start on this journey, and I felt it's okay. There's something that has triggered it. Something started it first. Before there's an action, before there's a reaction, there's an action. Now, something started it first, but Nigerians don't want to know where you are coming from psychologically. When they don't see you, they have judged you, and they assume that whatever problem it is you have is based on who they are seeing now.
So I want to kind of turn, based on what both Florida and Kike have said, regarding mental health. And I was speaking yesterday with a couple of attendees here, and we were talking about the number of psychiatrists that will live and work in Nigeria at the moment for a population of this size. A couple of years ago, I did some work with the Mirabel Center in Lagos, which is a rape crisis center in Lagos, which is one of the very few, if not the only, for essentially large swathes of Nigeria. What do you think, in terms of as a representative here of, I suppose, a medical community, what do we owe victims and survivors of sexual abuse? What can we do? What kind of framework can we create that will allow for them to receive the things that they should receive following sexual violence and sexual assault?
I think that we've got to separate out rape, because sexual violence and domestic violence is a big area, and as I've already indicated, it's pervasive. And therefore, the approach to that is a preventative approach to the vastness of what's going on. And that requires massive culture change. Right. And rape is relatively rare, and stranger rape is rarer still. So most rape is occurring in intimate relationships between people who already know one another, who already have a sexual relationship. And I think that it's sometimes very difficult in a man's mind to imagine that they're married, but they can be said to rape their wife.
Yes.
Or that they're in a relationship with a woman who they have sex with on a regular basis, but they can be said to rape somebody who is a sexual partner.
Yes.
So it's very important just to keep all these sort of nuances in mind. But to come back to your real question, which is to do with what ought to be in place for a rape victim, I think that mostly the medical, psychiatric or psychological approach to that sort of incident, it's normalized so that it's not regarded as psychiatric. So most of that is provided by self-help. It's provided by women groups who choose to run centers of this kind, and that would normally be funded by government, but it would not be working within health services. It will be working because it allows the women to be able to access the service. It allows the women to be able to respond to other women who may themselves have had that sort of experience, which gives them a sense of authority to be able to speak out of real personal experience and so on. So that's how we would normally think of it. I think I also wanted to say, one or two things really. One is that we are talking about the victim, but you also always remember that the vast majority of people who rape others are themselves victims. So it's important to recognize that you've got a cycle of violence going on, right, which is situated within a kind of cycle of deprivation, and that's very, very important to keep that in mind, and also to recognize that these behaviors they quite often occur in a cultural and social context. and that you can't just be looking at the individual who suffered, but you've got to be looking at what it is that makes this possible. Because if you don't do that, because as I've said, it's the prevention you're looking for, not the response to the actual incidents.
I want to go back to something you mentioned, Florida, where you mentioned the idea of the perfect victim and how we have an idea of what that looks like. I was watching the news this morning and it was replaying a tape of the wife of an Alabama judge, Roy Moore, and she was basically defending her husband and saying he would still be running in the election to come. And she said something else about the women who had accused her husband, and she said, "Consider the source," which was her way of disparaging the victims, I assume. And I thought that, again, that's something that Kike has also mentioned, that we often kind of segregate victims into, perfect boxes, and how we want to, we choose who we want to pity and who we want to judge. But I wanted to ask, you also mentioned something about the idea of the perfect victim. So I want to look to something that all of us are kind of used to, which is the entertainment industry. Yeah. Nollywood is a huge part of Nigerian culture. Films across the world, but also specifically in the Nigerian context by Nigerian creators. What job does Nollywood have in normalizing victims that look like actual everyday victims? So not the person who is, crying at the police station, but the person who gets up the next morning and goes to work because she has responsibilities and she's got stuff to do, and she really can't afford to stop and actually begin the process until, it's like you said, the people who don't want to recognize rape as rape because it would other them, so they move on with it. The number of stories that have come out with women who have repressed a lot of things, because to not repress it for them would have been wallowing in this misfortune when they should just get on with their lives. So what job has Nollywood in this scenario then to create more? Is part of the reason, I don't know how many women directors there are in Nollywood, or how many women writers there are, or how many people of different experiences are working in the industry, but is that something that we could look to as a good way of helping to kind of shift people's perceptions of sexual assault and how victims or survivors should behave?
Okay, so I don't like Nollywood, and I don't like Nollywood not because my husband says it's because of the quality of the movies, but it's not. For me, I think Nollywood is very sexist, and some of the messages that come out of it I feel is very detrimental to women. So because of it, I don't like Nollywood. And there was a movie, I think there was a time I took a 2-year break from watching any Nollywood, and what happened was there was this movie, Iniedo was in it, and Iniedo was raped. She and her friend went for a bachelor's party or something, but they're coming back from a party, and these boys came in and raped them. For a majority part of that movie, it was Iniedo's husband who was in anguish, and all Iniedo was doing was begging him to forgive her. And I was furious. I was mad. I was like, who wrote this? Who approved this? How is it that the person who is the person that something has been done to is the one who is begging her husband to forgive her? Who did this? I was really very upset about it. But that is how a lot of the storylines around rape does. It's viewed from the man's perspective as a man who something has been taken from. His wife has been violated. And you move it away from the woman and positions it on the man. And it's really, really problematic for me. The other thing that Nollywood does that I really get very upset about it is that Nollywood focuses so much on abortion. You get raped, you get pregnant, and you go and have an abortion. For heaven's sake, if you get raped, you can actually get something done so that you don't have to get pregnant. Why is Nollywood not focusing on that? Like, there is no need for this storyline. So this is some of the things that really, really upsets me, because people watch this. I'm a sex health educator and I have to talk, but the fact is that I don't have the kind of audience that Nollywood does. Nollywood can say this, educate women that in the case of rape, you get to the hospital, you get treated. Pregnancy isn't a natural occurrence of rape, because it's preventable. So this is some of the things that I get really upset about Nollywood. I'm like, you people are not serious. You people just want to entertain. And that's it. But the fact is that a lot of people take life lessons from Nollywood.
Right.
If it was just entertainment, then I would say, okay, fine. But people take life lessons from Nollywood. And that is one of the things that is very, very difficult for me also, to do.
Like I said, and the girl was raped and she really suffered, and then she's now doing well, and that's the end of the story. Can we just make movies that portrays that men have issues? I'm not saying, let me watch a movie that shows that there's a man that has issues. Before I decide to abuse a 13 years old, I have a problem. But I don't know because I'm a man. An average man does not know that he has a problem. It's the reason why the 10 years old is going and is thinking, this girl's hips is like her mother's home. She's 10. Let me have a movie. Let's remove abused girls alone. How about abused men? So the boy was abused, and this is the kind of man he has turned into. Let me have a movie that shows me that, I'm a man. Oh, could it be that thing that happened to me here? I'm not like this man. It's the same like saying that we're having centers for women, centers for women. I think we should have centers for men. But the truth is that men will not come. Women will go. Something women, we are there. We are there. Women emancipation, women empowerment, we are there. But if you say men emancipation, they will not come. So if you tag it like, let's say I'm having an event for men and I tag it sex and pepper soup, they will come. They will come. So, I package it well. And then when you come for the event, so of course, maybe you are thinking, I want to teach you how to have sex, but at least you are there. And then you come, and then I have discussions, and I'm talking to you about abuse. I'm talking to you about the premeditations you have before you rape, the thoughts that go through your mind. I'm talking to you that if any boys, we are only guys here, please, if anybody here has been abused before as a child, let's get help for ourselves. Let us know that if we don't get help, we are causing disaster. That's why we are raping our neighbors. That's why we are raping our wife's sister. That's why we are doing this. By the time we have discussions like that regularly for men, a man that needs help will realize that he needs help. But if we keep liberating only women and leaving all these men in the dark, I'm sure that they will not understand that they have problems. So the sex and pepper soup, somebody can start it up. Thank you.
So I wanted to add something.
Sure.
So there is another thing Nollywood does, and in the sense of when a man does, when somebody commits an abuse, they make it spiritual, in the sense that, okay, evil spirits came to the person and all that. And then you have a pastor who is there to cast off the evil spirit and all the rest of it. I mean, that buries the problem. It makes it there is no evil spirit unless pedophilia is an evil spirit, but these are just things. So and another thing happens is that their wives, I've never seen any Nollywood movie where the wife denounced the husband for abusing somebody. The wives are always at the man's corner, always begging the victim to please forgive, and all this then carries. I mean, it's as if that, okay, if the victim decides not to forgive, and you notice all the time, the victims always forgive, so that the man can be freed from the burden, so that he can go on and carry on with his life. Because if you don't forgive him, maybe his business will fail and things like this will happen. So the victim is now being pressured to to forgive him so that his life can go on. And it's more or less like all of this create enabling environment for people who rape, because they know there is no long-lasting effect it has on them. Their wives are not going to leave them. The children are not going to look at them and think my father is a rapist. They're not, even if they lose their business, all they have to do is just to get the person to forgive them, and then life goes back to normal. So these are all the things that create the environment that makes sexual assault right.
I just want to put out a call, since this will be going on to YouTube. If we have any Nollywood creators who would like to make a movie called Sex and Pepper Soup, please contact Iba Kike. Right, okay, we've got an offer over there. Anyone from Nollywood, please step forward. I'm serious. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what you said, and bearing in mind the work that you do with Sexeducate, and this idea of telling boys, teaching boys, and beginning there. There was a study recently, I can't remember exactly where, I read it somewhere online, and it was regarding directly teaching young boys in South Africa, and them seeing a drop in the number of reported abuses and harassment. And I wanted to ask, what age, because you work with people who work in schools, trying to educate them, where does it begin? What age do you begin talking to people about what is acceptable, what is a good touch, what is a bad touch? What framework do you have with your event that kind of helps to do that? I asked this, much like you were saying, Florida, about knowing when things you were abused as a child. I remember when I was a child living in Nigeria and my neighbor did something to me, and I came home and I told my family. And within minutes, they mobilized. There was never a doubt that I was lying. And there was never a doubt that this man had done something. And it was handled, but again, without going any further. My point is, where do you begin teaching people? What age does it start, and what does that teaching look like?
I think you teach from the moment your child can understand.
What age is that, though?
Okay, so from 2 years. Yes, from 2 years, so they know that. Somebody say, because 2 years old is saying, oh, it's called vagina, it's called penis, not kokoro. And they say, your child, I hope you are not like you're spoiling her. She's saying vagina. Oh, what should she call it? Because now some of these men are thriving on the ignorance of these children. They are saying that, let me play with your kokoro. What is that? But if he knows that, so there's a manual now that the Lagos State Center for Domestic and Sexual Violence team has. Good touch and bad touch. So when we go to schools, we ask them, come and show us good touch. If I touch you here, is it good touch? If I touch you here, is it good touch? Now, because if they don't know the difference between good touch and bad touch, now, if 5 years old now, 3 years old, they want to feel like they're grown-ups. You call a 3 years old a baby and say, Mommy, I'm not a baby. Now, so an adult guy comes and say, Toby, don't you want to be a big girl? A girl that is telling you already that you should not call her a baby. Now sees an adult man that is telling her that, let me show you how you can be a big girl. Don't let them call you a baby girl. She's excited that this man is head is correct. He knows that I'm not a baby. But the moment the guy touched her wrong, she say, oh, sorry, sir, that's a bad touch. So from 2 years old, let them know good touch, bad touch. Where should we touch? Your breast, is it a good touch? No. Your vagina, your penis, is it a good touch? No. Let them know from when they are young, teenagers, we keep faith. If the Bible even says faith cometh by hearing, it means that we need to keep telling them, let them keep hearing it, good touch, bad touch. Let them grow up and make their decision. It's better that they make their decision than somebody else is telling them what is not. So there's no age, from the moment that they're like 2, even you have some that are sharp, those 1 year and 6 months, those sharp ones, those very sharp ones. Let them know good touch and bad touch and show it to them. So let them know that even daddy is not permitted to fondle with your penis. So daddy will not let daddy say, I have penis, you have penis, let's play with it. No. No. Let him be able to tell daddy that, daddy, that is a bad touch. Or don't let daddy say, don't let daddy say, show me your vagina. let her begin to come and say, Mommy, Daddy asked me to show him my vagina today. Is it a bad touch? Because she knows bad touch, she's curious enough to Sorry, I can't talk too much. It's not my So, but I'm saying that you can even let them know that if you don't understand what a good touch is, come and ask me. So if I'm teaching you good touch and bad touch, come home and say, Mommy, my teacher said this in school today. Is it good touch? So let's teach them from every age, so long as they can talk and they can understand. Let them know what is good and what is bad. Thank you.
Thank you. Floyd, I have a question for you also. With regards to SlideSafe, there is an emphasis with the service on privacy and discretion, partly because you are responding to, like I said, a society that is less than open regarding these kinds of issues. And of course, the hope with stop me if I'm wrong, but the hope, I think, is for all of us to be more sexually conscious. And I wanted to kind of ask then, is there a typical SlideSafe user? Do you have like a set demographic, or have you found that the people who want to use the service come from a vast, I suppose, many different demographics?
Yes, we've had the people who live in Lekki, who work in Lekki. We've also had people who work in Alaba. So we've had from different walks of life. So it's not like there is a certain demography of maybe educated, enlightened, and all that sort of thing. It's just has to do with sexual consciousness, because you can actually be educated but you're not sexually conscious. You can be uneducated but you're sexually conscious. It's really like sexual consciousness is not it doesn't really like drag education along or the other way around. So that's just how it is. And the reason that I focused on sexual consciousness is because, okay, my son is 8 years old, or rather he's going to be 8 years old, and we had started talking to him about, I started giving him sex education from the time he was, I think, 2.5, and so that is when we started having that conversation. I bought him books about conception so he understands what happens, mommy and daddy and all the rest of it. We've talked about rape, him and I have talked about rape, we talk about sex, we talk about everything. I generally let him be the one to introduce the topic because he hears things, and then he comes back and asks me, what is this? And I try to have that conversation with him. And so, but we had that conversation about people not touching. So we went to swim. There was a Children's Day celebration, and we went to swim. And I made the mistake of not packing his swimming trunk, so he had to use his pants. And so when he came out from the pool and he needed to change because the pants was wet, one thing he told me was that, can he remove his pants here, because there were people around who would see him. And I said, no problem. I covered him so that he'll feel more comfortable with removing his pants, because he valued his privacy. He doesn't remove his pants in front of people he doesn't know, because he feels that that violates his privacy, because we keep talking to him about it, that this is yours, this is your private area. You determine what you're comfortable with and what you're not comfortable with. If somebody touches it, let mommy know, let daddy know, and let your teachers know. Let somebody know. So we keep on talking to him about it. So we know that when you increase people's value of sexual consciousness, they are more likely to keep safe. For somebody who doesn't value sexual safety, they're not going to spend 4,000 like my product cost of 753 to buy a product, because for them it's extra. There's still people who still say things like, why do I have to buy lubricants when I can use spit? There's still people who say, oh, why do I have to use a condom? It's sweeter when it doesn't have, there's no condom. So there's still people who have these opinions regardless of their educational status. So that is why I'm heavy on talking about sexual consciousness, because we have to get to that point where if a girl would not say things like, oh, my boyfriend doesn't want us to use condom, and not feel like, madam, you need to discharge your boyfriend, though. Like, seriously, discharge him. Somebody also told me a story about a woman who became HIV positive. How did that happen? Her boyfriend decided that it was time to stop using condom. No test done. Nothing to be sure that, madam, you're protected. And she went off condom just because the man said, don't you trust me? these are things that we want people to become very conscious of. This is what we want people to become very conscious of. So if somebody comes and is trying to compromise your safety, you say, hey, I don't want any of this.
I have another question for you, please. I know, like we said, there are many things that the pervasiveness of behavior and what is not in the penal code and so on affects how we talk to people. But what space or what place do you think psychiatry has in terms of creating a better world that would have fewer instances of sexual violence? Do you think that there is that space?
I don't think that space is governed by psychiatrists somehow. I mean, it's an amazing discussion we're having, isn't it? Because it's where sex is central to human life. And what we're really discussing is where and how and with what degree of consent and all that sort of stuff. That's what we're really discussing. Right. And it just seems to me that foundational to all these matters is something which is absent in our culture, which needs to be discussed, which is that we don't seem to value the person very much. And because we don't value the person very much, we do violence to the person. And that violence that we do to the person is not just within the context of sex, as you know. It's in context of domestic violence. And the play we've just seen shows you how child violence takes place, where you've got a child who's been sent to be a housemaid, who's treated as if they weren't human. And if you go onto the streets of Lagos, you see how the police or the army would use a whip to treat other human beings as if they weren't human, as if they were animals. So there's a real big issue inside our culture that needs to be addressed. And I don't think we're going to, just listening this afternoon reminded me of about 10 years ago when I was invited to speak in Cairo on autonomy. And I prepared my talk on autonomy as if I was going to be speaking in Birmingham. And it was when I stood up to speak that I suddenly realized it's a stupid topic to talk about autonomy in a culture where the autonomy doesn't exist. But they wanted me to talk about it with respect to treatment of medical treatments, whether you have autonomy to agree to treatments and so on. When you can't decide what job you want to do, you can't decide who you're going to marry, you can't vote, and then they want me to talk about autonomy. So I think it's very similar what's going on here, that buried underneath all this discussion is this lack of respect for others. And if you don't... And also that these problems, they are, I know I've used the word invisible and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but there's a kind of invisibility. I went to another talk about 12 months ago where the person showed us how in Ireland there was very little respect for children. And he showed it to us by showing us how on the streets of Dublin there were children who didn't have any shoes on, and the photos would be of photos of rich people, but caught in these photos would be children who were vagrants, but nobody noticed it. And because it was so invisible, and so I want to return to this idea that sometimes the things we can't see are the things which are most important. And it's important to use signals. You're using the signal of celebrity and Nollywood to nod in a particular direction, but you have to keep your focus totally on the fact of the pervasiveness of bad behavior, and that pervasiveness, you mustn't let it go. You must always point at it. There are, and I know I don't want to take time or anything like that, but there are all sorts of very complex things that we haven't talked about. So, for example, just very simple, very simple, unbelievable that if you show people who are likely to abuse women, if you show them silhouettes of several women, they can pick out and they're looking at silhouettes, not of real people, they're silhouettes of how these women stand, they can pick out the women who are most likely to be vulnerable to being sexually attacked, which is absolutely extraordinary, that somehow a person who themselves been victimized, they've been themselves beaten by their fathers, they've even been treated properly by their mothers, somehow they can pick out vulnerability in the stance that somebody else has. And they don't have to see their full faces or anything. All they have to look at is just their stance, their portrait, you know. So that's important, and that's saying something which, and I'm not an apologist for bad behavior, but it's saying something that we can't tackle it without tackling the problems inside the men, because the men are going to do it if we don't tackle these problems inside the men. So that's quite important to say that. And the final point I want to make about these sort of matters is that, I mean, you know, we inhabit, as we move towards a kind of very westernized way of life, we inhabit a highly eroticized culture. Absolutely extraordinary eroticized culture. And what I mean by that, which you know already, but if I just open it up a little, is that you've got your 2, 3, 4-year-old girls being already turned into sexual objects. So by the way what the shops sell and how they stand and all this stuff, and that's not good either for any of us. And there was, to the degree that, I can't remember which of the British shops was, that it had was trying to sell a line which it called Lolita. And they hadn't even understood what Lolita was about. So that's telling you and there were parents going to buy this clothing for their daughters. So that's telling you that there's massive confusion in the wider culture. And you are not going to get very far if we don't tackle it in all the rounds, if you see what I mean. Because they're not simple black and white issues. They are grey problems. And to understand them, you always have to be looking at the complexities rather than just looking at the sharp. If you look at the sharp edges, you can have a very good discussion and we can all laugh and we can all go home. But the real work is real, proper, thoughtful work, which has to look at complex material to try to understand the drivers in human beings, what the benefits are to the person perpetrating it, the person who is the victim, how it's affecting them, and to the degree that once you've been a victim, which we know to be true, and it's not just from incidental kind of people giving their own accounts, that once you've been a victim, you're more likely to be a victim again, which is saying something about the effects upon yourself and the way you then carry yourself, and the way the other person then recognizes you. So the event itself, it's not without damage, but the damage is not just internal, it actually invites further damage, if you see what I mean. So all of that very complex material, and you can't handle it in very, you've got to handle it for what it is, that it's complicated. You have to keep it on the agenda all the time. You have to talk about it all the time. You have to look at it in all the various manifestations so that we can have a sense of what it means in day-to-day life.
Thank you. So at this point, I'm going to open up the floor for questions. Oh, wow, quite a few arms. Okay, we're going to try and speed through this. What I'm going to do is take 3 questions at a time, and then we'll come back, and if we have more time, we'll go back. I'll start with the lady with the red bow over there, and then after that, the gentleman behind her, and then that lady over there at the back. There, thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jekang. Okay. Where do we draw the line between criminal acts and mental issues? Because I'm going to use Nigeria as an example. We don't have enough mental health institutions in Nigeria to tackle these issues, because if you jail a man who rapes a 6-month-old baby, he's going to come out and do it again, because he's like, what did I do wrong? Do you understand? He doesn't know that he's done something wrong. It's just a baby. Do you understand? I stuck my dick inside, I felt good, and he's going to come out and do it again, because nobody told him that he had issues, or nobody spoke to him and all that. So what do we do about that? Because you can't jail everybody who rapes people, because most times they have mental issues.
Right, thank you. And then the second question, Sorry, guys. Sorry. Can we just keep it so we can hear? Thank you.
My question is for Keke. I remember when you were talking about how, on social media, people are a certain way. Maybe they like to dress scantily clad, or they're always at Elegushi, etc. And you said it happens, it might be as a result of abuse a while ago. But it also seems like certain decisions, it seems like you were saying, which is why I want you to speak more, like certain lifestyles mean that the person might be damaged. But this person might just like men. This person might just like skimpy clothes. So I just want you to speak more, because it does seem like you're saying they have to have been damaged to decide to like men.
Great, thank you very much. And then the third question is over there. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ayodeji. I just want to ask a question straight to the panel. With regards to the issue of Harvey Weinstein and we at Nollywood not being ready, my question is, do we even have a framework to support these women should they come forward? Because I know that in the Yoruba movie sector, you have different caucus. And so when you allege against one of the caucus that someone there molested you, everyone in the other caucus might not give you a job. So do we have that framework to ensure that when these women actually come forward, we do not take the food away from them and we do not end their careers? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so the first question was regarding where we draw the line between criminal activity and mental health issues. Does anyone want to tackle that? Thank you very much.
I think criminal activity is precisely what it says it is. It's in the criminal code. So where psychiatry comes in is whether or not a criminal act is driven by abnormal mental health. Do you see what I mean? So that's just very straightforward. There's nothing, the concepts are not complicated at all. So you can't have a criminal act if there isn't a criminal code. And of course, the most grievous criminal act there is murder. So if you kill somebody, we still need to understand how you came to kill them. And it may be that you came to kill them because you wanted to kill them because you didn't like them, or you want to kill them because you want to inherit money. But you might kill them precisely because you're hearing a voice that tells you to kill the next stranger that comes across you. And when that's the case, then psychiatry becomes involved. All right, so that's where and then your second, we didn't actually ask us as a question, but you raised the point about what ought to happen to individuals where their abnormal behavior, their criminal behavior is driven by abnormal mental health. And that, again, is a matter for the law. So the law has a view about whether you ought to be being sent to a hospital. And the same law that we have in Nigeria is the same British law, because the Nigerian jurisdiction hasn't altered its law that much since 1960. So it's still the same law, whether you have a hospital disposal or whether you have a prison disposal. So it's the same underlying principle. But the fear that I hear in your question is, if you were to be sent to prison and you had a limited time in prison, so your tariff is for 12 years or 10 years or 9 months or whatever, that when you come out, are you still liable to act again, which is the fear in your question. And that is a question that has no answer, because that's a question for the culture that we live in, because some cultures want to say, one striker, you're out, so you're going to be in prison forever, and some people think it's totally against normal sense of justice to be like that, but that's a matter for discussion within the culture that we live in.
Thank you. And the second question was also something that I wanted to bring up, so thank you for bringing that up. The idea that for a woman to be sexually promiscuous, it's tied to some damage in her past, whereas it's likely that she just likes dudes. So how do he would like for you to kind of expand on that.
I was just saying, people just judge you on social media based on who they think you are. No, so I'm not necessarily on any side. Like, okay, so you see me, I post pictures, I'm fully dressed, but you don't know what I do. Like, since 7 years old, I've always been thinking about sex, Like, if I like you, you are gone in my mind. Forget it. I've done all sorts with you. But you don't know, because when I'm looking up prim and proper and I'm posting, I'm going to church, glory, hallelujah, or I'm speaking in tongues, rabate, gala, and I'm thinking, this Kike is just a good girl. Always church, work. But you don't know what I'm doing inside. But I'm not saying, but that's how it is on social media. We just judge by their timelines and their posts by what we think they are. So I'm not necessarily on any side. You can dress as you like. It's your choice. You can do what you want, really. It is your choice. But I'm not talking about how it is being perceived. So it is the perception that people have sometimes that make them judge. When you say something bad happened to you, they look at the timeline and they think, well, you deserve this. She doesn't deserve this. Do you know if I deserve it? But because I don't look like I deserve it. So I'm just saying it's perception. It is what people that are looking at the timeline think. I'm not necessarily saying that it is wrong. It's just the viewers. I was just answering the question of the social media issue the other time. So it's you. You can dress as you like. It is you. I took a picture of the lady 2 days ago. She had black lipsticks and she had blacks. And I took a picture. I'm not sure she's around. And I posted it. And somebody said, Kike, that girl, in fact, and the funniest part is that I had pleasant conversations with her. And I'm like, and she's not like that. Like, are you sure? But it was just assumed that the girl would be a terrible person because of the kind of lipstick she chose to use. But it was the way it was perceived out there. Now I couldn't control it. If I was not there to say, she's not necessarily like that, the person has gone with that opinion. I can't control it. It's a social media thing.
So I wanted to respond. I wanted to respond to your comment, even though it wasn't directed at me. So I think, and I may be proved wrong, but I think that we generally assume there are two things that happen in a situation where women are raped. Number one, she becomes very frigid or she becomes very promiscuous. But that is not the truth. You know, there are so many people who go on to have very normal sexual lives, who go on to enjoy sex without necessarily being with so many people or just being with one person. You know, there are just different ways people do react to it, and some of the times it has nothing to do with sexuality. So I always have a problem with that word damaged women, you know, because it just assumes that, this one, hope no day for this one, that kind of thing, and it's really not good. I am a strong advocate of female sexuality. I talk about sex all the time. I mean, I know a lot of people say, what does your husband think with how much sex you talk about? I'm like, he's used to it, because that's just how he met me, and that's how it's going to have to be. I talk about sex all the time. I believe women have to be in charge of the sexuality. If you are not having good sex, stop having sex. It's as simple as that.
The third question was from the lady in the back. We have a lot of sex-positive people in here. Shout out to you. I'd like to talk, the question at the back regarding the caucus in Nollywood. I don't know if there's much to say. Okay, I'm not sure if there's much to say about this, but I did want to point out that the thing that happens here happens in every film industry. I just want to make that clear. I don't know if we have time to answer that beyond the simple fact that women have trouble, regardless, across the country, across the world, reporting sexual assault, sexual violence, because there are structures in place designed to suppress their voices. I just want to make that clear. But I don't know if we have much more to say beyond that. I've been told I have literally time for one more question. I have two people who have had their arms up from the very beginning. We're going to make it super brief. You and then you. Do you want that lady over there? Thank you. And then that lady in the maroon.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Harriet. My question is directed at the professor and at Florida. Please, you said something about vulnerability, and then you also said something about sexual abuse not necessarily causing a woman to become more promiscuous. So I want to know if it's possible, because most of the time people generalize and think that if you are abused, it's probably because you invited it by your manner of dressing. But then the professor said something that abuse can actually lead to vulnerability that is inbuilt into the victim, such that she puts herself or finds herself in that same situation over and over again. And this has happened to me in my personal life. So I got to a point I was like, why am I always in this situation? There has to be something in me. Without seeing a psychologist, I came to that decision. So I'm really shocked today now to find out that I actually was right. So I'm really praying that Aki Festival can go on for a long time, because we learn a lot of things about life here. So is there any way that that vulnerability can be removed for the victim so as to prevent the recurrence?
Okay, thank you. And then the other question was the lady in the maroon dress over there. Thank you. Can we keep it very brief, please? We don't have a lot of time. Thank you.
Hello. We're all here. So I just want to know, growing up, I realized a lot of the things that guys do is internalized. They don't realize what they're doing is wrong. For example, I had friends tell me, oh, if you go to a girl's house, she automatically wants sex. Or there's this popular joke that goes on Twitter like, oh, I thought foreplay was the first 45 minutes you used to beg her to have sex with you. So there are many cases. I, for one, have been abused a couple of times, and I think about it. If I accuse this person and he apologizes to me, like, would that make me feel better? I just want to know how men or people that have abused people, how they can begin to right the wrong. What can they do? I, for one, I want the people that have abused me, I want them to tell me, oh, what I did was wrong, and I never want to do it again. Because what is most important is that another girl or another person doesn't go through what I have gone through. So just give us steps. I know there are guys here that have committed a lot of sexual violence acts and they didn't know. But now we are talking about it, and a lot of them know. They probably thought, oh, they were guys and it was just fun and it's normal. So just give us steps, things you can do, how you can begin to right the wrong. It's not even a must that you go back to talk to the person, but just create awareness.
Thank you. We've got 2 minutes. Great, thanks. Okay, do you want to tackle these? The first question regarding vulnerability.
Yes, I'm not. He's a psychiatrist, so he's able to speak in a more expert opinion. But what I think is when you've been abused, you're sort of more vulnerable, especially if you didn't recognize what happened to you to be an abuse. If you accept it as a normal behavior, you are more likely to accept it from the next person. If you didn't recognize that this is something that happened, that happened to you that wasn't right. And so that is in the way that I think that you become more vulnerable. And also there is also something that happens with abuse for a lot of people. Before we become sexual, it becomes first emotional. So if somebody takes the time to really, really abuse you emotionally and makes you lose your self-confidence, and that way you're less likely to demand a standard for yourself. I remember at the time that I was single and I had a view of the kind of man that I wanted to marry, and one of the things I always said was I didn't want a man who thought that cheating was in men's nature, and I was told repeatedly by many people that I was going to be single forever. And I said, well, that may be so, but I was not willing to accept a man who would tell me that I should expect cheating from him. So because of that, I was very insistent that if I met such a man, nothing was going to happen between me and him, because I didn't think there was a future. But if as an abused woman you've accepted that abuse is part of life, you're going to be more likely to attract the kind of men who know that they can easily overpower you and continue to abuse you. So that is what I think. But the doctor can put me wrong. Then to your question about what can be done with the men. The first person who raped me, I did send him a message on Facebook, and I told him, this is what you did to me. And he apologized. He said he was sorry, that he was young too when it happened, and he hadn't been enlightened about rape and all the rest of it. And I accepted his apology because I really believed that he didn't know any better. because we don't have much sex education in Nigeria. So for what most people think is normal boyfriend and girlfriend relationship is actually abuse, and they don't know it. The second person, I just told him a couple of days ago, like 2 days ago, and the reason that before I actually sent him the message, it took me so many years. Like I've known him for a very long time. So every time I come by his name, the thing that pops into my brain is that this guy raped me. You did this to me. You did this to me. But each time I ask myself, should I let him know? Should I tell him? But by telling him, I felt so much better, because now he knows this is what she did to me. Because some of the times when we discuss rape, a lot of men who may have themselves raped people will come and talk about it as if it's something that happened, like spirits came in, raped people and went away. So by the time they start realizing that, look, this story of rape, you are also part of it, they start being a little bit more sensitive to this and realizing that, who knows, maybe tomorrow they will receive a text message from a girl who tells them, you are the rapist. You see these stories, you are the person. Maybe you get them to sit up.
I'm going to ask Professor Oyebade to also respond to the question about vulnerability. Thank you.
Thank you. Just very, very briefly, I think that the main message I want to leave is that there is higher vulnerability in the victim if they were repeatedly abused as a child, which is quite different from being abused in a rape environment as an adult. And I think that with a pre-pubescent child, repeated episodes of this kind lays down memory as if that is the way life ought to be. And that sort of child, when they grow up, attract that sort of behavior. And that sort of child needs attention in order to be able to draw that to a close.
The last thing regarding your question about, I think I follow what Florida said. You open your mouth and you tell the people. I think a lot of the conversations that we have had today kind of show how much there is still to go with regards to this. I've also seen the thing where I know men who are known abusers have come out on Twitter and said, oh God, rape is bad. And I'm like, dude. So, I mean, but I think there is a fundamental lack of knowledge, and that's not exclusive to Nigeria at all. But I also think, going back to what the professor said regarding the things that we place value upon in Nigeria, the way that we treat people, these things all bleed together. None of this is a standalone issue. A lot of it is intersectional. A lot of it requires work on multiple fronts. But I have to release you all for lunch now. Thank you very, very much to our panelists, Professor Femi Oyebade, Kike Alamawolo and Florida Ozuaru. Thank you so much.
Professor Femi Oyebade. And thank you very much to you, Bim Adeomi, for doing such a great job.
Before you all leave, Kike Alamo's book is available as an e-book, but she has excerpts, so you would like some. They look like this, so please come and get them. She's sitting right there. Thank you.
And they're available at the bookstore. Very quickly, because we're now running 58 minutes late.